Aloha Barbara, how was your summer?
Too short, Ron. It's the first week of school and I'm swamped.
I hear you. I guess we'll make it through the year just like we always do.
This year is different though. My school is moving toward more inclusion. I just found out I have several emotionally disturbed students in my classes this year.
Really? I just took a SPED class this summer. We learned a lot of good stuff about teaching students with disabilities. There's a lot of helpful information out there for teachers in your position.
Really? Did you learn anything about emotionally disturbed students?
Yes. The first thing I learned was about people first language. When someone says emotionally disturbed student, it puts the disability first.
So what would you say? Student who is emotionally disturbed.
You could say student with an emotional or behavioral disorder.
It sounds like an awkward way to say messed up kid.
Maybe so. But it's more sensitive to use people first language. There are a lot of kids out there with emotional and behavioral disorders. In fact, students with behavior disorders represent over 8% of students served by IDEA. Those are just the ones who have been identified. There may be many more.
That many? Where did you hear that?
Mastrapiri and Scruggs, 2010. Another study by Lane, Kalberg and Shedcaro in 2009 said that the number may be as high as 20%.
But what do they mean by emotional behavioral disorder? Did Mastrapiri and Scruggs say anything about that?
That's a good question. It may not be possible to know the cause of every emotional behavioral disorder, but there are a number of possibilities.
What about depression?
That could qualify. It could also be schizophrenia, selective mutism or anxiety disorders, anything that affects school functioning. Some students act out disruptively. Other students withdraw.
Did Mastrapiri and Scruggs say why this happens to some students and not others?
In some cases it may be biological. It could be genetic or biochemical. In other cases it could be environmental. Domestic violence is often associated with emotional and behavioral disorders.
How were the students in my class identified as having an emotional or behavioral disorder?
I don't know about your particular students, Barbara. Identifying students with emotional and behavioral disorder can be difficult because it is sort of subjective. Perhaps that explains why there is such a large difference between the estimated number of students with emotional or behavioral disorder and the number who have been identified and are receiving services. According to a study by Cullinan and Kaufman in 2005, African American students are also more often identified as having emotional or behavioral disorders, so there are questions about how reliable methods of identifying emotional and behavioral disabilities are.
It must be hard for these students to focus on learning.
They definitely need some extra help. According to a study by Salmon in 2006, students with behavioral disorders have the lowest GPAs of any students with disabilities.
What can I do to help these students?
Mastrapiri and Scruggs have some good suggestions for that. They emphasize the importance of maintaining a positive classroom environment. Clear rules and consistent enforcement are important, but a punitive atmosphere will not be helpful. Students with emotional and behavioral disorders need frequent praise. The Council for Exceptional Children recommends positive reinforcement, token economies and behavior contracts.
I've been using a token economy system to reinforce positive behavior for years. The students like it and it really works. I didn't start it because of inclusion, I just thought it was a good idea for a regular class.
I think you'll find that many of the ideas that work well for students with emotional and behavioral disabilities are helpful for your other students as well.
You know, in my social studies classes we do a lot of class-wide and small group discussion. I'm worried about these students interacting with the other students.
That's a good point. Some students with emotional and behavioral disorder may lack the social skills they need to participate in discussions. It might be a good idea to teach social skills. For students who are withdrawn and don't want to speak, the 1996 Nebraska Teaching Strategies for Students with Diverse Learning Needs recommends using the student's name when asking a question and giving them extra time to respond.
Those sound like good ideas. I'm also concerned about these students' ability to keep up in class. There's a lot of information they need to learn in social studies. My classes demand sustained attention and the ability to learn a lot of new things.
Salmon suggests that direct, teacher-led instruction followed by independent seat work is often effective for students with emotional and behavioral disorders. When assigning independent work, make sure it is small enough chunks so you don't just give them a whole pile all at once. It should not be too hard or too easy. Disruptive behavior may be a way for students to stop doing work that they are frustrated or bored with. If you interrupt class to deal with it, then you are reinforcing the disruptive behavior. If students with emotional and behavioral disorders are getting appropriately challenging and stimulating work, the behavior is less likely to come up.
I'm glad you mentioned that, Ron. Because I think my biggest concern is classroom management. If these kids come into my class with a bunch of baggage, how am I going to stop them from ruining it for everyone?
Salmon also says that students with emotional and behavioral disorders respond to the same kind of classroom management methods that other students do. It's very important to have classroom rules and consequences posted where everyone can see them. All students respond to a well-organized class, but it is especially important for students with emotional and behavioral disorders. If disruptive behavior is a problem, students with emotional and behavioral disorders can even be enlisted to work on the problem themselves with self-monitoring. This empowers them to take responsibility for themselves.
Wow, Ron, you certainly know a lot about teaching students with emotional behavioral disorders. Do you want to dance?
Okay.